welcome to our channel this afternoon.
Okay.
Today's panel, we are talking about our favorite books or authors and why. And this is a light topic, and I hope everyone enjoys it. You can name a book from any genre. There is no discrimination here. The most important thing is that we are reading. And like a wise person said, between the pages of a book is a lovely place to be. I agree with this person, and I'm sure you all agree, and that's why you tuned in today. So I'll start with my favorite book. I'd like to make a disclaimer that I'm a big reader. I've been reading since I was a young girl, so it was difficult to choose a favorite book. I really don't have one, but I can choose two books that have had a big impact on me for different reasons. So the first book is the book Moving the Center, the Struggle for Cultural Freedoms, and this was written by Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who is a Kenyan writer. And this book is a collection of essays that blends scholarship with an inspiring personal narrative. This book talks about global imperialism and its impact on cultural freedoms, which are presently hindered by Eurocentrism, colonialism, and the imperialism of language. And might I add, classism. And I find this book interesting because we all know that culture is universal. All people produce culture. So the center of culture should not be located only in the West, but it should be located in centers around the world to reflect that all humans are creators of cultures. That's why I like this book. And the second book is more of a light reading novel, and this is the book Not a Penny More, Not a Penny Less. This book was written by Jeffrey Archer. Actually, it was his first book, and it introduced me to the world of Archer as a writer. This book is interesting because it's about four people: an American Oxford professor, a respected society physician, and an elegant French art dealer, and a charismatic English lord that are conned by one man, and they lose all their life's fortune to this one man. So they hatch a plot, and the plot is to get their money back, not a penny more, not a penny less. And as we follow the plot and how they do this, it's exciting, it's amusing, it's hilarious, and it's a book that introduced me to Jeffrey Archer as a writer, and I must say he's one of my favorite fiction writers. So the ball is in your court, ladies. So we'll start with Jamila. Please let us know who's your favorite writer and why.
So my favorite book, I don't have it right now, but the genre that I do love reading is actually educational. So this here is one of my space books that I have. The one that I was going to talk about is actually really thick, maybe this thick. And it basically tells like a story from the beginning of the universe and how the universe could end and everything in between, from how space technology is improving and how it was back then, and also to how planets are made and what can destroy a planet and a star. And I really do love reading about it. It's the first factual book that I really like reading because it's something that interests me a lot. I find that space is something that no one knows fully about. So reading about it is kind of interesting because you get to know things that you wouldn't actually learn in school about the universe, and we all live in the universe. So I think that it's important to know about it. And then my second book is Percy Jackson. I don't think you can see it here, it's backwards, but Percy Jackson, The Battle of the Labyrinth. I loved this book when I was younger because I'm also obsessed with Greek mythology. So books that have anything to do with Greek mythology and like have a modern take on it, where like the gods will come into the like future and actually see people in the present. I find that very interesting. So this is my second favorite book.
Thank you, Jamila. We are all aware that you love space and astronomy, and it's really interesting. Jamila is very passionate about this subject, and she talks a good game when she's talking about this subject. Thank you so much for sharing. Next is Marie Claire.
Yes, I have two books I'd like to share with you quick. One is actually a collection of poems by Maya Angelou. It's called And Still Arise. I really love this book. Actually, was recommended by Chico a while ago, but I didn't have the time to read it. And what I love about these books is that I get an inspiration of faith reading it, and it really her experience of life comes out when you're reading, and it shows there is a kind of obviously when you read the poem people get different feelings, but there is a treasure for me that I get from reading this book, especially this time of the year. And she's really a very powerful and woman who has gone through a lot of obstacles, and it shows through that book. Obviously, I haven't read everything, but yes, as I said, it's like a poem divided in 3 parts. So the second, I really recommend it that when you get a chance to read it. So the second one is actually more educational to do with my course, and it's boring. So it's to do with the legal skills, and I'm reading about the negotiation skills, which I think I actually need, and I need to improve. So yeah, I don't have an option with this one, but actually I'm enjoying it slowly.
Thank you, Marie Claire. I'm sure we all know Maya Angelou, and all of us, maybe most of us, have a favorite poem by Maya. So thank you for sharing. And so we'll have Imani as our next panelist.
Hi, everyone. So I'm very picky with books, but there's one book that I really liked a lot. It's by Stephen King, and you probably already know him from his horror storytellings, which I liked a lot. I like that, and the book that I chose is a book called The Outsider. And the reason I like it is because it's about this little town where everything seems normal, like most of his storytellings. Everything seems ordinary. It's like a utopia, but then there's always something sinister, something dark within this world they live in, and that slowly starts to be uncovered. Now this book is about a child who was killed, and then someone is accused of it, and then they find out that he was also somewhere else. So he has an alibi, so at the same time he also killed the person. So the investigators go through different interviews to figure out how this guy can be at the same 2 places at the same time. So yeah, that's the book I like a lot.
Thanks for sharing, Imani. Stephen King is a prolific writer. He's written so many books and sold so many books, and many movies, horror and thriller, are based on his books. So that was an interesting choice, and thank you for sharing. So we'll have Antonella next.
Hi everyone. I'm so happy to share with you my 2 favorite books. The first one is The Sorrows of Young Werther, and it's a story written by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. It's a German writer, actually, from Romantic period. And as soon as I studied it while I was in high school, I was amazed by the plot. It talks about an impossible love story, but in a tragic way. And it's a book which has had an impact on the young generations of Germany on that period from a philosophical and religious point of view, because it talks about a love story that is not lived by two people. So at the end, the protagonist suicide, and of course this message was misunderstood, but people, lots of pundits have debated, and it's a very interesting book which has plenty of interpretations. So I like philosophy. That's why this book was not the usual love story that we all hear. It's very original, so I highly recommend also to the people that like literature to bump into German literature, because they have very, very good writers. And the second one, you don't know, it's a little book. It's called Flastrock. It means little songs. It was a gift from my grandma, and now my grandma has passed away. But as soon as I was a little girl, she used to read me this book, and poems for children are very, very good. They stimulate fantasy, and they can teach difficult things, but in a simple way for children. So a special bond with this book with my grandma.
Thank you very much, Antonella. Like I said earlier, culture is universal. So we have people producing culture, literature from different cultures and countries. It was nice to hear of books from Germany as well as Italy. So in these sessions, we get introduced. It's a cultural exchange, and it's fantastic to be introduced to people and writers and books we didn't know before. So definitely we'll be looking up those books. So we have Shiro next.
The one book that had a profound effect on me is a biography by a man called Raymond Franz. It's called Crisis of Conscience. Raymond Franz was a leader of a high control group, and the story is the story of the struggle to prevent the erosion of your God-given conscience, and the ensuing dilemma of choosing between loyalty to God and loyalty to your religion. We know that most religious leaders claim to have been chosen by God, and that's a very difficult thing for anyone to prove. You're just supposed to accept it, and religion has been used to manipulate, exploit, and oppress people. So France shows how a group of people could come up with rules and laws and say that they came from God, and change them after a while, after destroying people's lives maybe, and they say their new rules also come from God. So what he tries to show is that we do have a conscience. We all have a conscience. We can be able to use our conscience to make our own decisions. We don't have to rely on others to basically run our lives for ourselves. And then my other favorite book is The Animal Farm by George Orwell. I actually read this book in my language, Swahili. It's called Shamba la Wanyama in Swahili. It was translated into Swahili. The book tells the story of some farm animals who are discontent and rebel against their human ruler. Their hope is to create a society where animals can be equal, free, and happy. But instead of that happening, the farm ends up being just like it was under humans. There's a dictatorship under a pig called Napoleon. So there's really no difference between being under human and their own fellow animals. So the message that Orwell gives is that we should be shrewd when you're following people, whether they are religious leaders or political leaders. Many of them promise freedom, but gradually take away our civil liberties and rights. He also wants the reader about the various methods used by political and even religious leaders to manipulate, and the propaganda they use to oppress and control the populace.
Thank you, Shiro, for a summary of those two books. All of us, I'm sure, are familiar with Animal Farm and the line, all animals equal, but not but some are more
some-
equal than others.
Yeah.
This is a book that was written in 1945, but still relevant in our day. So thank you for the recommendation and for sharing. So we move on to Jose.
All right. Just that I was happy to choose books because I read a lot of books, but I got with me to tell to talk about. This one is Hope in Ballet. I don't know if you can see it, by Michaela. She was born in Iran and she lived in the world as a young child. She left her parents do the war, and then she was taken to an orphanage, where she saw a newspaper with a child dancing, but she didn't know exactly what was that. But she hoped and dreamed she became to be well. So she was adopted by American family to help her to achieve her dreams. So she's now international best lady. So that's what that inspired me about the book, is how she kept hoping and really become a ballet star. And the second book is by Trevor. And yeah, I love how he put the image of apartheid out there. And the reason why he called this the war crimes because it was a law for black to make. So he said everything about apartheid. I read about the lower read, but the book by Trevor give me a big edge about so there is that made me so I don't know if it made me so sad where the mother who asked her friend who looked like Trevor to walk with them so that people may think that that friend was very so that yeah, The Sun Has Shine by Anthony Ray Hinton. He was in prison in America for the time he didn't commit. And of course, Barack Obama, dreams for my father.
Just say your books are so interesting. The Trevor Noah book sounds like a book I would love to read. And your last book,
please do.
Dreams from My Father. Yes, and if this is a book that you read and underline because you're enjoying the things he's saying, you can identify with them. Yes. So thank you for sharing those 4 books. We look them up, the ones we don't have, and we recommend that those who don't have those books, look them up and read and be introduced to something different. Maggie, please. You.
Okay, the book I'm going to talk about, I'm not a good reader, yes, but I used to love Chinua Achebe with Things Fall Apart. And the reason why I love that book is rich in education, because he used things that are simple, that you can understand, the parables, and because it connected, it related with so much with what is there in my culture. So like one time he was giving an interview in 1994 at a Paris Review. So he gave a parable when he was asked. This parable was that he said, until a lion have his own story, then the hunt will always have their own story. If the lion cannot tell their story, nobody will know their story. So it's like saying you have to, first of all, say what you are so that people should know your story, for them to understand what you are. So that is what the Chinua Achebe was saying. And that book, the title Chinua Achebe, came from, he derived from this parable that he said that the white man came peacefully with their culture, which is religion, and separated, broke the African, and they fell apart. He used a knife to cut the strands that had put them together, and they fell apart, that now they cannot even collect their culture together. Everyone is talking their own things. So that is what the white man came. He didn't come with a war. He just came smoothly with the religion and peacefully. But he came and broke your brother and separate you, and then you fell apart. So Chinua Achebe had those parables that actually you could relate with and you could understand what it says. And another parable, which was also good, it says, when you invite people to your home, you don't invite them to come and eat because they are starving. Because they have food in their homes. But the reason why you are inviting people to come together is because you have something to share. You cannot sit alone, which means you have to come together to share and build each other. The same way he was saying that if you see people sitting in a courtyard, maybe under the moonlight, it's not because there is no moon in their homes. They can still sit there and see that moon. But the reason they are coming together is because they want to build that connection and be together. So that's why I liked that book of Chinua Achebe, because it was a nice book, that it was very educative in most cases.
Thank you very much, Maggie, for sharing. Yeah, Chinua Achebe is a well-known Nigerian writer who many of us who've gone to school in Africa are familiar with his writings, and especially the book Things Fall Apart. Very interesting. He's also a prolific writer. He's written many books on the social and psychological stories, especially about pre-colonial Africa. So it's an interesting reader, or rather writer, to get into. Thank you for sharing. And now we have Kerigo.
I actually chose the book Facing Mount Kenya by Jomo Kenyatta. And the reason I especially like this book is because it talks about the way of life of one particular tribe in Kenya, the Kikuyu tribe. It was written by the first president of Kenya before he was the president, and it's written in 1938. So this is an antique book, and I've read a lot of it. It talks about our way of life before colonialism. It talks about our way of education, our way of doing things, the way we just used to do things. A lot of those things are lost today. But the book actually is there because it shows the way things were before they were changed. And it's special to me because it was actually given to me by my late father, because he saw I had an interest in African culture, and he had this book, and I asked him if I could have it, and he gave it to me. So that's one of the reasons I treasure it. Then I have one more book, War in the Forest. It was actually written by our father also, Peter Gloria. It's written in 1971. And this is a true story, the true story of Kiboi Moreithi, who's in the book here. It's his story is told to my dad, and he wrote it down, and it's about the fight for freedom. Kiboi Moreithi was a freedom fighter, a Mau Mau fighter, and my dad collected this story, heard it from him, and actually wrote it down. It's also an antique now. As I said, it's written in 1971. So this book, you can just find it on Amazon. And just for people to know, this book is not written by a fraud man. So it's a good book for people who want to know how the freedom for for Kenyans went on in the forest.
Thank you, Keriko, both for sharing a book that has sentimental value for you as well as pointing out that proverb. Because like you said, many of us have had that proverb, but we didn't know the source. So Maggie, thank you for highlighting that. And that's why we love these sessions. So last but not least, we'll have Shiko.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Maggie, actually, I was going to talk about Chinua Achebe, Things Part as well. We read it at school a long time ago, and because of my memory, I can't remember. So I was going to just go back and read the story again. And actually, now that you've reminded me what the themes were, I will actually read it. And that proverb about the lion and the hunter is so true, because there's another English saying that goes, remind me, the winners in history tell the story. So whoever wins a war is the one that will tell the story. And they will always paint the losers as horrible, bad people, because they're to one, but they might have been the bad people. And that's what has happened actually in history today, when it's written from imperialist perspective of people who went around colonizing and enslaving others. They write the history, so they will obviously paint themselves as the good guys. So I like that saying. So another book, I don't have favorites and I haven't read for a long time, to be honest, because I'm so busy, but I do want to go back to reading. And there are a number of books I've started and I haven't finished. And one of them is this one. I don't know if you can see it. It's called Decolonizing the Mind by Goge Wathiongo. This book is an anti-imperialist perspective about the destiny of Africa and the role of language in combating imperialism and neo-colonialism, because our continent is being colonized again. And I think this book shows how language and just culture and preserving it is so important in fighting colonialism and imperialism. This book was the author's last book in English. After that, he decided he would be writing in Kikuyu, his mother tongue, because he believes that preserving our own languages is very important. And he chose to write in his mother tongue rather than in the English or French or whatever other imperialist languages that are out there. And I really respect him for that. Because he's preserving the language. Another book that I've just started reading actually 2 days ago is this one, and I don't know if you can see it. It says The Harlem Renaissance. Okay, this is a book about the Harlem in New York between the 1920s and 1930s, where Black people, after coming back from the war, especially the men that had gone to fight, they came back with a really renewed fight to be equal. And during this period, Black people in America used culture, language, arts to reclaim themselves and really develop their own culture and empower themselves. And it was such a great period because so many people outside, as in white Americans, were really taken over by this movement, and they wanted to be part of it. And they would go into Harlem to participate in the arts and the music and the theater that the Black people were producing at this time. So at that period of time, Black people in America are very empowered, and they had a lot of social capital. So I really love the book, and actually the style, the fashion, the art, it's so amazing. So I'm actually looking to collect some of those things. Another book I want to read is this one, and please, if anyone has read it, tell me if I should go ahead and read it, because people talk about it a lot. It's by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, Nigerian feminist, and it's called Half of a Yellow Sun. I want to read it just because everyone keeps saying that she's one of the top African writers. And Ngugi wa Thiong'o and Chinua Achebe are also top African writers. And lastly, I want to read this. And again, if anyone has read it, it's called The Alchemist by Paul Coelho. So another recommended book. So thanks for listening to me. And I love this session because it has made me feel like I need to go back to reading. I used to love reading. I used to be caught by teachers reading books while they were teaching subjects I wasn't interested in. So I want to go back to reading. So thanks a lot, everyone, for your recommendations. There's so many books that I've heard from you guys that I want to try. Cheers.
Thank you, Shiko. Chinua Achebe and Ngugi wa Thiong'o, very well-known African writers who've contributed a lot to African literature, but also African scholarship, where they've also been involved in the discussion that you mentioned about writing, the impact of writing in borrowed languages for the African writer. And they take two opposing positions. So those who are interested in such a subject should look up that discussion in an academic paper and read what do the two opposing sides say are the positives and negatives of using borrowed languages to write our literature as Africans. And I want to say it's been a lovely session. I don't know if anyone has a comment or remarks about the books that have been mentioned. My first question will be to Antonella, where I want to ask the book by Goethe, the German book,
yeah,
reading. Did you read it in your language, Italian, or in English, or do you read German?
I read it in German because at that moment I had been studying foreign languages. Now I am studying other foreign languages, but yeah, in original language, and also in Italian and in English, because to have a deeper understanding of it, you should buy it in the language that you prefer, with whom you are more familiar with.
That's an interesting point. But I always wonder when books like that are translated, they are written in one language and they are translated to another language, if the original thoughts are really well brought out, like in the original book. And I'll give an example of a book I hold dear. This is a book by Frantz Fanon. It's called Black Skin, White Masks. And people have remarked that the powerful message that this book was written in, that is French, is kind of lost in translation when you read it in English. Personally, I find it very powerful, even in English, because it's like an existential analysis and critique of the impact of racism on Black people. But people say that there is a big difference in reading the original work in the language it was written and the language that has been translated. What do you say, Antonella?
Exactly, I completely agree with you. I didn't know about this book, but I think that from your experience, you also experienced it. It's always like that. It's normal. There's always a loss of meaning from the target language from the original language to the target language. That's why the translator is not an easy job. It's a job with lots of responsibility. So in order to better appreciate this book that you were mentioning, you could also look, for example, on YouTube, some theatrical performances. Which one?
Thank you. And she wrote the same question. You've read a book that was written in English and you read it in Swahili, but you already know the book in English. Did that have an impact on your reading experience?
I read it in Swahili because I was doing literature in Swahili. Otherwise, the language I prefer to do my reading in is English, to be honest, because that's the language of instruction in school. But I found it very, very interesting in Swahili too.
Thank you. So it's something to reflect about in our reading experiences, whether the language that we read in has an impact on the message that the book is giving. In any book that has been written in one language and translated to another. Thank you so much for this session. It was very entertaining, educational, as well as we got introduced to new books. We talked about books on space, poetry, philosophy, scholarship, ballet, German books, Italian books, poetry, and so on. Very different subjects, very different genres, but we all gained something, I would hope, from the discussion. So I would encourage everyone to keep reading. I myself will look up all these books that were mentioned, and some have caught my attention, which I promise to read. So thank you. Next time, please join us for the next session, and it will be, the topic is, what are your lockdown hobbies and fitness routine? This will be on 2nd September. We invite you all and thank you for watching our channel, and we say goodbye for this afternoon. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.